Welcome, everyone, to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Have you ever wondered about history? Were you ever bored by it? Do you know there's a way you could actually get excited about it? You could actually want to learn more. You could actually want to dive into that rabbit hole. We're going to be discussing that and a bunch of other things on this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Menden Honey Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa. Hi there and welcome, everyone. We've got a great show planned for you today. It'll be very, very interesting. It involves how to get yourselves more involved, immersed in history in ways that you maybe never imagined. With us today is Chris Blomgren. He is the president of
That's close. We're going to say Blomgren.
Blomgren, yes. I keep forgetting the M.
Good Swedish name. Yeah.
Blomgren, Chris Blomgren. He is the president of Historic Pursuits. Chris, before we start, just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how you got to where you are right now.
Well, I love that you're asking me that, Chris, because what you're really saying is tell us your story. And I think one of the most powerful aspects of history is we all have a story to tell, and only we can tell that story from our perspective. So naturally, everyone should love history because we all have a story to tell. So I'm a Rochester guy. I grew up in the 70s, 1970s, and history wasn't maybe my first love growing up as a kid, but maybe it's in part because of the way they taught it. So there was a lot of memorization, memorize the 50 states, or here's a word search, or do a report on something you're not particularly interested in. So maybe not my true passion. But then once in a while, a good teacher would come up with a good activity, and it kind of salt things up. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Oregon Trail game.
Oh, sure.
It's a video game now. Yeah, a lot of us played that. But back in the 70s, it wasn't a video game. It was actually an experiential education game. So as you were crossing the Oregon Trail, you had to go through a series of challenges and work with your classmates. I remember one in particular, you had to take a quarter and throw it in a trash can. And if you made the shot, you successfully crossed through the mountain pass. If you didn't, you were gone. So, stuff like that, going in and seeing how maple syrup was made. That's the stuff I got into. So as an elementary school student, as a high school student, I'm going to say I didn't have a real love for history, but I had a love for adventure. And if you presented history in an adventurous way, then yeah, I liked history. High school's done. I'm off to college. I'm at SUNY Oswego. And now we're in the 80s. And honestly, a lot of professors had not mastered the art of engagement. It was a lot of summarize, lecture, regurgitate. And how did it apply to me and my life? And, it really wasn't there so much. So, yeah, there were some interesting stories, but started to get a little love for the story. And then I had gone through ROTC.
Right.
Yeah,
what was your background in college? What did you major in?
I did major in history, but I was also going through ROTC at the time. And honestly, my best history classes were the military history classes.
Oh, wow.
And maybe that's because, maybe because it was very applicable. So we'd go and climb Mount Marcy. We'd get out there using a map and compass, and it made me appreciate, I guess that's what it's like to be a pioneer. I guess that's what it's like to, go on a trail that's been, undiscovered or whatnot. So honestly, it was still probably more a love for adventure than a love for history at that point.
So I got to ask, have you ever played those Avon Hill games? Is that what they were? The old the board games, historic war games. Do you remember
Yeah,
those?
my roommates played those. I never really so much, little Dungeons and Dragons on the
Okay, yeah,
side.
that's
Yeah,
the fantasy
it's a
version
given,
of
right?
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a
Everyone
little
played.
bit, not so much, right?
Yeah, yeah. So now so what did you end up doing for a career then? Were you a teacher, or how did you apply
Well,
the history that
right
you
out of
had?
college, yeah, right out of college, I was a regular Army officer. So shortly thereafter, they were shipping me off to Fort Benning, Georgia, and after that, up in Alaska, where I spent most of my time. And then that's when geography becomes real, when they stick in Alaska, okay? Because all of a sudden now you're really interested in the Inuits, the Eskimos, right? And how do you survive when it's 50 below zero and strange things are happening? And then, during that time, well, now we're at war with Iraq. So here we are in the middle of, the Arctic tundra, and I've got a map of the Middle East on my wall. And it's like, okay, well, now I guess history is starting to get kind of real. So I think then maybe I really started to get more interested in history because I was looking for examples of leadership, especially leaders under extreme duress, because I was an infantry officer and I was waiting for the call to say, all right, hop on a plane. We're leaving Alaska and we're heading for the desert.
Let
It
me
never happened.
let me break in for a second,
Go ahead.
because what you're describing, everyone goes through. Everyone goes
Mm,
through in their career. So this is after school. If you're a student watching this right now, you might be thinking, "Oh, this is all make believe." No, this is real life. When you start your career, you are beset by a number of challenges. Some of those challenges are just you yourself. Are you doing the right things? So, Chris, what you're describing really is a method to answer those questions using history. So, they often
right.
say, how's this practical in the real world? Teach me math. I can use that every day in my life. The same is true for history. You can use history
Mhm.
every day in your life to really propel yourself forward. So tell us now, you're learning how to be a leader by looking at historical examples. Then what happened?
So I spent a few years on active duty, and then I met a lovely woman who basically said, "Get out of the army, or I won't marry you." So I made the choice to go for the marriage part, and I moved to the Seattle area. And at that point, I said, I really do like history. Why don't I get my teaching certificate? So I got my teaching certificate, and it's kind of interesting because a lot of what teachers do is not teaching. You're a counselor, you're a parole officer, you're a mentor, but a lot of the time it's difficult to actually teach something. And the New York State says, okay, here's what you're going to teach, and here's when you're going to teach it, and here's who you're going to teach it to. And oh, by the way, while you're trying to do that, we're going to throw in a whole bunch of fire drills and a couple of lunchroom fights and a couple of drama, and then we're going to cut your budget and we're going to switch you to another. Yeah, so to actually teach something is almost a small part of being a teacher. There's so much else out there.
So what brought you from
But
Seattle back to Rochester?
so having grown up in Rochester, I tried to convince my wife that the Rochester area was not the New York that the West Coast thinks of when they think of New York. I said, don't think of New York City, right? We're the good New York. And when where I live, think of it like this: where we border Vermont. So where I live out here in Palmyra, it's a heck of a lot more like Vermont than it is like New York City. And it took me years, maybe 13 years, to convince my wife of this. And she finally acquiesced, and we moved to Palmyra, just east of Rochester.
So now you become a teacher, and tell us about the transition from being a teacher to what you do now.
So teaching, like I said, there's so many different obstacles to it. And it's really about, how do I get these kids engaged? And a good district will not tell you how to teach. They'll tell you what to teach, but they won't tell you how to teach. So I started doing some experimenting with that. And I kind of figured out, well, wait a second. If a kid is actually doing something, that they find engaging, then they're going to be far more likely to learn something. So as an experiment one day, I said, well, here we are studying colonial America. Let's learn how to write with a quill pen. And on the one side, you've got a Chromebook with all the knowledge of the universe at your fingertips. And then on the other side, you've got a feather, a turkey feather. Well, given a 40-minute class period, 100% of the kids would rather choose the feather and some walnut ink. And they would just they can't even write cursive. So essentially they weren't writing, they were drawing. But they would spend the entire, I wanted it to be a 5-minute activity. We spent the entire 40 minutes just drawing with a quill pen. And I said, well, wait a second, what's going on here? And I kind of started thinking experientially. And Chris, you know this, if I were to ask you to teach one of your kids how to tie their shoes, well, would you give them a lecture? Would you show them a podcast on it? Or would you cuddle up next to them and say, follow me and let's do it together?
You know what? I'll answer that question because that's hard to do. If you're teaching a kid how to tie a shoe, it's like tying a shoe in a mirror. It's not the way you tie the shoe. So same thing with tying a tie. Teach your son how to tie a tie. Oh, wait, hold it. No, exactly. I gotta do it for you. I gotta do it myself. Yeah. So that's definitely a challenge, but it's, and here's the thing, and they used to teach you this. I don't know if you were involved in Boy Scouts or as a Boy Scout leader, what they used to teach you is you show them how to do it, demonstrate it, but eventually you let them do it. And that's the key. When you're talking about writing with that quill pen, you are letting them create history through that pen.
Right.
That's a very powerful mechanism. So now tell us, so then what happened when you went from being a teacher? How did you transition into the historic pursuits activity?
Well, I wanted to jump right into it. As a matter of fact, I wanted to quit public school teaching and start my own business. I was working with an organization called the Living History Education Foundation. And my mentor there, Joe Ryan, said, Chris, I know you're excited, but get your pension first, and then you can go full speed ahead. And I was just chomping at the bit. I just really wanted to do all this experiential stuff. And so I said, all right, well, let me see if I can do both at the same time. Let me see how much I can get away with in the public classroom as far as experiential education. And so that became kind of my forte in the classroom. As much as possible, I'm wearing the goofy outfits. I'm bringing in the props. I'm putting something in a kid's hand and saying, play with this. And just as a form of engagement, because one of the things I quickly discovered was, kids would come back to me afterwards and they'd say, how come you never taught us about X, Y, and Z? And I said, I never had time. I can't teach you all of history. So I thought to myself, what I really want to do is I want to teach history, yes, but more so I want to teach an intrinsic love for history. Because if I can make you a lifelong learner, then I don't have to teach everything in 180 days. You've got the rest of your life, if I can give you that love for history. So that became my focal point. How do I get people to fall in love with history? And that's kind of where Historic Pursuit started. This tie-in between experiential education and intrinsic love of learning.
And it's, if you're a historian, and I know that I think we have at least one historian watching right now, this is very instructive, because the challenge for most historians is you have to take a step beyond what you're interested in. If you're not interested in it, you're not going to be a historian. So almost by definition, you've got this particular interest that you want to explore from a historic standpoint, and it really enthralls you. I mean, I'm doing research and I go down these rabbit holes that probably other people would be bored going down. So the challenge then becomes to take your interest, your passion, and sort of infuse that into others. And that's where this engagement, participation really comes into play. We're going to be talking about that when we return. Right now, we're going to take a commercial break, but we'll be right back after these messages.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
So if engagement works one hand when it comes to history, getting people excited about history, another aspect is actually trivia. That's what I'm reminded of when I see that commercial. So Chris, you started Historic Pursuit.
That commercial kind of proves my point. That's the first time I've seen that commercial, and honestly, it made me want to grab a machete.
Believe I was looking for that prop. I didn't own a machete when we were doing that commercial, and I had to go get one. So I sent my wife to Home Depot to get a machete, and she tells me the cash register looks at her really funny, like, "Lady, what are you gonna do with this thing?" So. But yeah, no, it's the whole idea of just becoming a part of history, of chopping through the forest, that the virgin forest that so many people did 200 years ago when they first settled this region. Well, I'm not going to steal your thunder. So tell us, how do you do this? Because you do this, I've seen you do it. It's pretty good, and I think that the people in our audience are going to learn a lot just in terms of process when they see how you do it. So explain, give us some examples of what you do when you bring people into your location, or even I think you go out on site and do a lot of work too. So tell us how you do that.
Yeah, so we have a series of programs available, some where I would come to you, maybe I come to your school, maybe I come to a business retreat or a museum, or we have some where you come out here to our homestead in Palmyra, which is it allows us to do some things which you can't do most other places. So out here, you can actually shoot a musket. You can actually start a flint and steel fire. You can spend the night in a tent. You can learn a colonial dance and make your own colonial lemonade or whatnot. But it starts with engagement. So that kind of explains the outfit. At the start of a presentation, I'm trying to do something interesting. Maybe I'm playing on a fife. Maybe I'm flicking some flint and steel. But I'm trying to get you through the proverbial front door and say, "Ooh, what's that? What's he got on? I've never seen that before." And a good teacher knows that you've got to get them through that front door and thinking about history and forgetting about the drama on social media and everything else. So that's my first step. And then the programming itself, it can be, my specialty is the colonial era. Everything maybe from the Pilgrims to the fur trade. And that's my passion. So if you want to learn what it was like to be one of the first pioneers in Wayne County, if you want to know what it would be like to be in the Sullivan-Clinton campaign, if you want to know what it would like to be a fur trader or in the War of 1812 or a woman on the frontier, then my job is to immerse you into that. So we provide you with the outfit, we provide you with the accoutrements, and then we start learning the skills. And whether that's learning how to start a cook fire or set up a tent or whatever the case might be, it's learning by doing. And that's just, that's the hook right there, because my job is to get you so excited about the topic that you run home and you talk about it at the dinner table that night, and then you're running to the library or you're running to the museum the next day because you're so jazzed up about it.
So now you do this not just for students or young kids. You do this for adults too. Is there a difference between the two audiences or participants? Are the kids looking for something in particular? Are the adults looking for something? Tell us like what your audience is looking for when you do this.
Well, one of my catchphrases was nobody loves history less as they get older, because obviously the more history you've experienced, the more connection you have. So the hardest target is that middle ground, those teenagers. Children are naturally curious. Adults have learned a love for history through life experience. But then you've got that group of seventh graders that, you know, history sucks and so do you kind of mentality. And that's what I taught as a school teacher. And I kind of have a love for that age group. But everybody can get sucked in as long as you say, let's do history. History is a verb. Let's do history. And it's kind of funny because I did a workshop at the Wayne County Museum, and we had everyone there from like a 5-year-old to an 85-year-old. And I was really focused on the kids and getting them to try things. And the doggone adults, they kept answering all my questions and taking all the stuff away. And it's like, well, yeah, you can enjoy this too, but it's kind of for the kids. So it was really neat to see that everybody loves history.
Yeah. Now you've got a couple of pictures here of some examples. If you want to go through them and just explain what's happening here in this picture, this looks like something you'd be doing as a Boy Scout, maybe.
Pretty close, right? So one of my things is that history is about relationship. You're learning not only about yourself, but the people around you who maybe are alive today or maybe have passed. And I kind of love this shot because you've got an older kid teaching a younger kid how to safely cook over an open fire. And obviously they're both very much into it. They're both learning something, and there's a relationship going on. So here's, the younger kid, he's seeing that older kid as a mentor. And I love the relationship aspect to it. And that picture kind of demonstrates that.
Now, are they actually spending overnight camping there, or is this a daytime sort of thing?
That was a French and Indian War reenactment. So we set up tents. We spent the night, and we actually went on patrol that night looking for the French and Indian enemy in the woods.
Wow. And of course, you teach them that we call it the Americans, United States history calls it the French and Indian War, but the Europeans call it something else. And I don't know who else. It has lots of different names.
7 Years War.
7 Years War. Yeah. So much of our history is particular our war history around the revolutionary times is so enveloped in the European military history. So all these wars that are going on in Europe, well, there's wars going on here too at the same time, and we're kind of on the periphery. Almost every single war up to the War of 1812, there's something going on between England and France or somebody. And in a way, we kind of benefited from that because, say, for example, England had to worry about another front, not just this one.
Right.
Anyways, what's this other picture that you have? It is looks like a dinner table of some sort.
Well, this is a good segue because, myself coming from a military background and loving the adventures, the adventurous side of war, which of course is tragic and everything else. But I didn't want people to think, this program is all about just reenacting wars. It's so much more. And so this particular program is called The Hearth and Home. And it was about, well, what was life like at the home, on the homestead during the late 1700s. And so we spent a day just learning how to cook meals, learning how to do some of the chores that were traditionally done by women. Some of them as young as you see in this picture. If you're 2 years old and you can carry water and fetch firewood, then you're working. And so we just spent the whole day doing chores, scooping horse poop and everything else. And it was just fascinating because some of these kids maybe don't want to take out the trash at home because it's a chore, but we're out scooping horse poop and gathering wood and cooking and everything else, and they're having a blast because it's just it's different, it's exciting, and it just gives you an appreciation that people are people 100, 200 years ago. It's all the same.
Now, in terms of what people can do to experience what you have, you've got this site out in Palmyra, and just we're going to put that up on the map here just so that people can see where you're located in terms of everything else. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a little east of Rochester, and it's in Wayne County.
Yes.
So it's kind of a straight shot off the thruway if you get off at exit 43, and that you could funnel in from the south through 390 or from the west through the thruway. So
I'll say it like this: if you get off on the thruway at the Manchester exit, you'll be at our homestead within one song of the radio.
That's a good way to measure distance. How many songs on the radio it takes?
One radio song will get you there.
So if somebody wants to come out there, what do? Do they just give you a call and set up a time, or are there set camps? Like, for example, you know how, say, schools would have summer school during set periods, or museums would have like sessions during set weeks of the summer. Do you do that sort of thing, or is everything by appointment?
So as far as the camps on site are concerned, it's very specialized by appointment. So if you go on the website, historicpursuits.org, and just, shoot me a line, hey, I'm interested in, my kid's 8 years old and he's really interested in this. I'll wait until I get a crew together. Maybe it's a group of homeschool kids, maybe it's a scout troop. And then once we have the numbers, I'll say, talk amongst yourselves, pick out a date that works for pretty much everybody. The more people you get, the less it's going to cost. Parents are always welcome to join. It's very family friendly. So, I love it when moms and dads and grandparents participate. Actually, it makes my life easier. And once we have that crew together and we figure out the date, then we're off and running.
So how about from a business standpoint? I'm thinking more something akin to, say, Outward Bound, where a company brings their employees all together to experience a team building activity. Is there something like that too that they could experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I said history is about relationship. History is also about character and what happens when character encounters conflict. So you see a lot of that in the business world. So I might come in, you might be having a business retreat, and I might put you in a survival situation. We're on a life raft. We have to figure out what we're going to take. We're in the wilderness. We have to prioritize what we're going to do before nightfall. And it's really interesting because I'll kind of lead the way, but I'll also step back and people figure out for themselves the metaphor. History is about metaphor, and they kind of figure out for themselves, oh, I get it. I love to use flint and steel. So you got a piece of flint and steel, and you look at a piece of flint and you say, well, this isn't much. This is dull. It's not particularly impressive. There's nothing happening here. But when you spark it, all of a sudden you see, oh, there's hidden potential in here that you wouldn't see just by looking at this. And using metaphors like that, people pick up on it, and they kind of lead the way, and it's about self. I'll help, but it's really about that self-discovery.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for being a part of today's show. I am fascinated by what you do, and I could think of an application that I might be able to use. Maybe have a bunch of my classmates come here once a year. Maybe we'll send them all out there to your forest, see how many survive.
We'll get you. That sounds great.
So, thanks for being here. Thank you everybody for listening, watching live, and asking any questions that you might have had. I will add that if you do want to participate and ask our guests questions, you can only do that if you're a member of the live audience. It's all virtual. You don't have to go anywhere. You just come on to the link. How do you get the link? Go to state of greater western New York.com and sign up for free. And every Thursday morning, you will two times, get an email that reminds you what the show is and how to link to it. It's all free. You just go to the link, and now you're a member of the live audience. If you want to ask a question, that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, and I understand a lot of people work at noon on Thursdays, so it's kind of tough to watch this live. You can watch it on our website. Same thing, stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com. You'll see the replay of it, or it's rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30 on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Like the page, subscribe to the channel, and those platforms will notify you when the show is rebroadcast. So that's all we have for this week. Again, thanks for being here, and we'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye for now.